I got my PhD in the field of organic chemistry, postdoc at Stanford University, joined the group of a man who was going to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry, voted one of the top 50 most influential minds in the world. I was a visiting scholar at Harvard University. I've spoken at every major university in this country, have over 650 research publications, voted the R&D magazine Scientist of the Year. I'm in the National Academy of Inventors. I'm a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, over 120 patents, started 7 or 8 companies. We work in areas that range from medicine to material science to electronics, computer memory, medical devices. We work across a broad range of areas. But more than any of that, what means the most to me is that I'm a Jew who believes that Jesus is the Messiah. I grew up just outside of New York City. I thought everybody was Jewish. I didn't even know that there was anything else. I had no particular interest in that, other than when all my friends were getting bar mitzvahed or bat mitzvahed, and then I would attend, of course, every week. There was never really any excitement for me. I remember once I even tried to talk to a rabbi. He just brushed me off. There was very little explanation for me. I remember when I went to college, I started meeting a number of people that said that they were born-again Christians, which was sort of an odd term. What's born again? What do you mean, born again? One person saw me in the laundry room. He said, "Do you mind if I give you an illustration of the gospel?" And I remember we sat there and he actually started to draw a picture. A cliff with a man on one side, and he drew a little man, and then another cliff with God on the other side, and a big chasm in between that he labeled with sin. And I looked at him, I said, "I'm not a sinner. I've never killed anyone. I never robbed a bank. How could I be a sinner?" And he had me read a verse from the Bible. "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." In modern Judaism, we never really talked about sin. I don't remember ever talking about sin in my home. So he turned to another passage. Jesus said, "I say to you that everyone who looks upon a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Pow! I felt just as if I had been punched right in the chest. Here I was, new in college. I didn't think anybody knew. I would pick up these magazines and I became addicted to pornography. It was just through those magazines. And all of a sudden, something that's written in the Bible, somebody who lived 2,000 years ago is calling me out on it. And I felt immediately convicted. And that now I realized I was a sinner. When I read in the scriptures what sin is, then I knew I was a sinner. How am I going to get to God? We Jews know this better than anyone else. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. This description in Isaiah 53 of how he will bear upon himself my sin, the things that I had done, and this was him. This was the man that took this upon himself on the cross. The perfect God comes and gives himself for us. He is the one that gives himself for us. I started to realize how Jewish the New Testament is. This book is so Jewish. The New Testament is so Jewish. It's all around Jewish people. And then on November 7th, 1977, I was all alone in my room. The realization that Yeshua is the one who died on the cross. And I said, "Lord, I am a sinner. Please forgive me. Come into my life." And then all of a sudden, someone was in my room. And I opened my eyes. I was on my knees. I opened my eyes. Who's in my room? That man, Jesus Christ, stood in my room. This amazing sense of God. Jesus was in my room and I wasn't scared. All I started doing was just weeping. The presence was so glorious because he was there in my room on that day. And I didn't want to get up. And this amazing sense of forgiveness just started to come upon me. That was him. Finally, I got up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to tell. Here's this Jewish kid from New York City. What am I going to say? My cousins were shocked. How could you do that? You're Jewish. Telling my mother how I had invited Jesus into my life. She didn't say much. She was weeping. She told my father they weren't happy at all. And she said, I don't blame them for killing Jesus after the things that he said. Who is he to come against these religious leaders that have dedicated their lives to helping people and to tell them that they are whitewashed tombs? Who is he, this young man in his 30s, to say this to these scholars? He got what he deserved. And my mother's a very deep, pensive, careful reader. She read from Genesis right on through the Tanakh, the whole thing. When she got done, I said, what did you think? She said, God warned us over and over again. He warned us. When my daughter was about 15, my mother and father came to visit us. At one point, my mother went into her room for several hours. She came out. She said, quite a young girl you have. She talked to me for a long time. She started reading the Bible again, both the Old and the New Testament. One day, not long after that, she called me on the phone at the age of 72. She said, Jimmy, you wouldn't believe what happened. I said, what happened? She said, I was just reading. And it hit me. It hit me. The way he gave his life. I believe it now. Jesus is the Son of God.
All right, Darwinian theory has already been debunked by the biologists. Many biologists suggest that, and I'm quoting them, random mutation and natural selection have long been recognized by many evolutionists themselves to be insufficient to account for the complexity of life. They say that neutral drift is quantitatively more important than natural selection in understanding genetic differences between organisms. Further, the mechanisms of evolution and their relative importance are continuously subject to careful examination and revision. So careful examination of the evidence has not been avoided. So I'm saying if it's not, remember what it said here, if it's not random mutation and natural selection, and you say that's already been debunked, why don't you sign the statement with me? And so they say neutral drift. What's neutral drift? That's the small genetic changes that occur between me and my children, and then between them and their children. These small, that's more important than this natural selection process and this random mutation. And the other thing is the mechanisms involved. So evolution, this is quoting them, is both about the mechanism by which change occurs over time and the theory of universal common descent. This is what biologists tell me. Evolutionary biology. Evolution is about the mechanisms by which change occurs over time. Okay, so we want to see mechanisms. And the theory of universal common descent. First of all, the universal common descent theory is a very advanced theory, and it has a lot going for it. I concede it has a lot going for it. It is an amazing theory. Let's look at this, though. Common descent versus uncommonness. Humans have about 20,000 protein-coding genes. That means that within the DNA, there's about 20,000 segments that make these proteins that then are the little nanomachines that build us. That's why you can eat a kolache today, and tomorrow it's a part of the skin on your hand. How does that happen? Well, because we have these little nanomachines that do this, and these proteins are these nanomachines. So this is coded by the DNA. The DNA has the code for this. But that is only 1.5% of the entire DNA in the human genome. It's within the 1.5% that common descent studies are primarily focused, in that 1.5%. So a large-scale project was instituted in 2003 by the U.S. National Genome Research Institute. That's not a Christian organization, it's a federal organization, called the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, or ENCODE. and it seeks to determine the role of the remaining 98.5% of the genome that was formerly poorly called junk DNA. They don't no longer call it junk, they call it the intergenic regions or intergenic DNA. There's ENCODE evidence that part or even much of the intergenic regions have regulatory elements that can affect gene transcription. So in other words, they're not junk. They were finding, and so what happened was that when this started coming out, they would say, oh yeah, there's not that many, there's only about 100 or so of those segments that are relevant. And then the next year there were thousands. And the next year there were tens of thousands. Finding that within that 98.5%, there's huge amounts. Remember, all of universal common descent, the vast majority of universal common descent is based on 1.5% of the DNA. So if you look at that 1.5% of the DNA, we are 99.99% the same as a chimpanzee. But if you look at the other 98.5%, that's where the differences occur. If you look at just that 1.5%, we're 70% the same as a dandelion. It's true. There's work on orphan genes called orphans, which casts new light on the uniqueness of some genetic information. Orphan genes are considered unique to a narrow taxon, generally a species. Therefore, orphan genes are markers for uncommonness. Okay, so the uncommon human being. Humans alone have the capacity for art, music, advanced communication, advanced mathematics, and religious practice, which constitute the broader organization of symbolism. Therefore, if one is intent upon a common descent model, there was a massive and presently unexplainable infusion, intrinsic or extrinsic, along the proposed very short descent pathway between Australopithecines and the modern humans. That's in universal common descent. We're right below Neanderthal or Australopithecines. If it were an intrinsic infusion, then the requisite anatomical and chemical differences between the modern human brain and other hominid brains are presently indiscernible and unfathomable. And the chemical basis for the evolutionary mechanisms for such changes are both unknown and presently immeasurable. If the infusion were extrinsic, meaning some outside influence did it, then the materialist evolutionist and the supernaturalist share some common ground. The mechanisms are unknown for that. Here's the mechanism problem. This is right off of Wikipedia. What is a body plan? A body plan is the ground plan, is an assemblage of morphological features shared among common members of a phylum-level group. The term is usually applied to animals and envisages the blueprint encompassing aspects such as symmetry, segmentation, limb deposition. Our limbs are deposited differently than, say, in a tiger. That's body plan organization. And it is thought that this evolved evolved gradually through this Paleozoic period. Nobody understands the mechanism. Remember what biology is about, evolutionary biology? From their own words, that evolutionary biology is about universal common descent, of which we're finding there's a lot of uncommonness in the other 98.5% of the DNA. And the other thing is about mechanisms. We have no mechanisms. We have no mechanisms for brain. Why our brains are working so much differently than other hominids, meaning than chimpanzees and apes. Why is it? What is it about our brain that is so different? We don't know. It's obviously different. We can't even tell. So where's the mechanism? The mechanism isn't there. We can't fathom the mechanism for body plan changes. So the mechanism problem, any massive functional change of a body part would require multiple concerted lines of variations. Sure, one can suggest small changes ad infinitum, but a concerted requirement of multiple changes, all in the same place at the same time, is impossible to chemically fathom. One day we might know. As of today, we don't know. That doesn't mean we'll never know. We may know someday. As of right now, we don't know. But evolutionary biology has been reduced to storytelling, with little chemical mechanistic data to support its claims. You ask an evolutionary, how does that happen? And they'll go through and they'll tell you a story. Give me the mechanism for that. How do the chemicals do this sort of thing? Look, I just told you the mechanism. No, you didn't. You told me a story. There's no chemistry in that. There's no molecules. Show me the paper that showed me molecular structure. Nothing. It's storytelling. And then you present to them the totally opposite argument. They'll tell you another story for that. Great storytellers. It's been reduced to storytelling. This is true. So there's collective cluelessness. Therefore, I don't understand the mechanisms needed to change body plans or the mechanisms along the descent pathway between Australopithecines brain and modern human brains if we are indeed commonly descended as predicted by the universal common descent theory. And nobody else understands the mechanisms either. Nobody. Nobody. They can say what they will, but nobody understands it. This is why they avoid me. If they had the answers, they wouldn't avoid me. But unlike most, I'm saying it publicly. And many people don't want to say it publicly because it has ramifications in their careers. Collective cluelessness. Recall quoting the biologist, evolution is both about the mechanism by which change occurs over time and the theory of universal common descent. The mechanisms are unknown, and the theory of universal common descent, though robust, is being confronted by evidence that can be interpreted as uncommonness. So further study is warranted. I would never say we shouldn't work on this. We should work on this. But it's going to need a lot more study to be convincing. Here's some vacillating so-called scientific facts that are really theories. We already considered two. Junk DNA versus intergenic DNA and its regulatory function. So, 20 years ago, it was said that 98.5% of the DNA is junk. You know, it's from things in the past, it has no regulatory function, doesn't do anything. Well, now that's changed. So that was what was called a scientific fact, that 98.5% is junk. That's a fact. Believe it, that's a fact. No, it's not a fact. Remember, facts don't change, but theories change. So what was touted as being a fact was really a theory. We looked at another one. Evolutionary theory, formerly dominated by random mutation and natural selection, is now replaced by neutral drift and universal common descent as the dominant features. So this thing that was drilled into middle-aged people here, that random mutation and natural selection was what evolution is all about, sorry, that's wrong. We got a new one here. So it's not fact at all. How about the genetic diversity in humans cannot have resulted from a single breeding pair? We cannot have, and I'm talking about the biological Adam and Eve, who were the first progenitors of the human race. It is believed that it could not have been just two people. It had to be far more diverse than that. Well, that scientific fact is being questioned as of this year. As of 2018, genetic experiments are showing that a single breeding pair in the last 10,000 years, or even 6,000 years, can account for the genetic diversity in humans, provided that interbreeding with human-like creatures, like Neanderthals, was occasionally occurring. You say, well, humans wouldn't breed with Neanderthals. Human sexual behavior never surprises me. Never does. And that there was intermingling with things that were humanoid, it happens, these things happen. I mean, and things that aren't even humanoid happens today. And so once you provide for that, then it could have come from a single breeding pair. Do not let scientists with their bold claim of quote-unquote facts upset you. Theories or conjectures are not facts. But unfortunately and shamefully, many scientists themselves do not make the necessary distinction. This leads to confusion of generations of students and even professors themselves. Professors have told me, look, evolution is a fact. Well, it depends on how you define evolution. You want to have small changes? Yeah, you can see that all the time in the lab. Have you ever seen evolution of a complex system? And what they'll do is they'll give you lots of references on the immune system. The immune system morphs based on what's presented to it. And my argument to them, yeah, and it remained an immune system. It never became a digestive system. It remained what it was. Show me evolution of a complex system. Even propose to me how that would happen. You don't even have to have done it. Just show me how that immune system would morph into a different system. And they get extremely frustrated with me. And why is that? Why would they get frustrated? Well, maybe because it's more like a religion. Maybe so.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Taryn.
Hey, Taryn.
I have a question for you on behalf of a middle school student.
Okay.
And so this note says, I know that if you pray and ask for forgiveness, you are forgiven, but I still feel like God is angry at me. So just what would you advise a student to do from that point?
Well, 1 John says, if you confess your sins, he is faithful and just and will cleanse you of all unrighteousness. So We've got to get out of the idea, in fact, this may sound crazy to people here, but God doesn't love you any more when you obey him, and he doesn't love you any less when you disobey him. He's an infinite being. He loves you infinitely. He can't love you more if you obey him, and he can't love you less if you don't obey him. But he wants what's best for you, and he wants you, or the middle school student, to follow him because he knows that's what's best for the middle school student and his entire plan here on earth. And the middle school student, the student you're talking about, is going to get benefits of worshiping God rather than rebelling against God. So people think they're getting back at God when they rebel. No, you're not getting back at God. You can't hurt an infinite being. You can't hurt him by cursing him. You can't help him by praising him. Who gets all the benefit of praise? We do. Who gets all the detriment of cursing God? We do. People always say, oh, what's God, this cosmic ego? He needs us to worship him. God doesn't need anything. He's the infinite being. He knows we get benefits from worshiping him. That's why he wants us to worship him, because he knows it's best for us. So God doesn't love anybody more or less because of what they do. He loves everybody infinitely. But God's not going to force people into heaven against their will either. If people don't want God, if they want to reject him and go their own way, he will separate himself from them. And that's what God does. That's ultimately where we're all heading. We're all heading either to be with God in heaven or separated from God in hell.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, Taryn.
Yes, how you doing? What's your name?
My name is Kayla.
Hey, Caleb.
Hi. I'm an atheist as well, as Lauren was.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. I don't expect to change anyone's mind, and I certainly don't speak for all atheists.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of atheists who the reason they turn away is because of some of the things that God has done
Mm-hmm.
in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those many people. There's other reasons too, but we don't have that time.
Right.
One of the reasons that I turned and I'm not back, even I'm one of those people who wouldn't believe in Christianity even though it's proven to be true. I would accept it as true, but I wouldn't follow it myself.
Okay. At least you're honest. That's good.
Yeah.
It's good to be honest. I don't think it's good not to follow the truth, but it's good to be honest. Go ahead.
I mean, I would know that it was true if it was proven he was real,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think there's enough evidence to prove that he is, but if he was, I still should follow him.
Okay.
Because of things that he said.
Okay.
One of the biggest things that made me not, I would never do it, is because of Noah's Ark, and because he destroyed an entire planet full of people,
Mm-hmm.
except this one family,
Yeah.
just because they didn't believe in him, and they chose not to. Even though he gave us free will to do as we choose or not.
Uh-huh.
But then he destroys the entire planet
Yes.
because they didn't.
Excellent question. Yes.
And there's no way.
All right. Let me just ask you a couple questions here, because I'm with you on this one, but I want to make sure we understand the situation accurately. You said that the reason that God destroyed the world was because they didn't believe in him. Actually, if you read it, the reason he destroyed the world because there was only evil in their hearts continually. They continued to do evil. Right? So here's the question. Is it just if evil acts are punished? Is it just to punish evil acts?
What he did?
And just in general, is it just to punish evil acts?
You mean what he did, destroying the planet?
Well, don't go all the way there yet. Let's just stay with, is it just in general to punish evil acts?
I don't know what you're asking.
Someone does something wrong.
If someone murders somebody,
Yes, they should.
Okay, generally we agree then, right? When evil's done, justice must be done. Okay, now, if God is our creator, and he did create people, when God kills them, Does he murder them?
I believe so. I mean, if he gives us all our own mind and our own choices and our own decisions, and we go and make children and have husbands and wives, and I mean, he's made us autonomous. I mean, you can't just go and kill something.
Okay, but when, let's take it out of Noah's Ark for a second. Let's just say somebody who's 100 years old dies. God exists, and he pulls his hand away from you. Did God murder that person?
Well, I mean, you die when you're old. That's not.
Okay, so, but if God is God, does he have to guarantee everybody 80 healthy years?
Well, no, but I mean,
Okay.
not everybody on the planet is 80 years old.
I know. The point here is does God have the authority to play God?
I don't know. I mean, if he made us purely to be worshipers of him, and that was his whole purpose, then sure, because we're just these things that he's created. But when you create something with free will and everybody has their own thoughts, you can't just kill everyone because now you gave people free will and they choose not to believe you. That's not okay.
Well, we do that in America.
Yes, I
That
agree with it.
if people do evil things, we punish them.
Yes.
And if we can do it, can God do it, is the question.
Yeah. Assuming he's real, I suppose.
Yes, let's assume for the sake of argument he's real.
Yeah.
Can he do something like Noah's Ark if the people truly were doing evil? Can he judge them?
Well, yeah, but they, according to the Bible, they were making idols and graven images and things. And I mean, I guess in the Ten Commandments that's a sin, but when we think about true evil, I'm thinking, we're all going crazy and killing each other and raping each other and, stuff like that. Whatever, but you can't just murder an entire family.
Well, this was before the Ten Commandments, but people already knew right from wrong. And people already knew that what they were doing was wrong. And God gave them a lot of years of warnings, and they still decided not to follow God. Let me ask you one other thing. If there is a God, let's assuming all this is true, is it unjust of God to take people from this life to the next life anytime he wants?
For any reason at all?
For any reason at all, if he's God.
Well, I don't know how to answer that.
Well, because if Christianity is true, people never really die, they just change locations. Right?
You're right.
God can take you from this life to the afterlife anytime he wants. Nobody's guaranteed 80 healthy years. God can take people at 2 or 82, that's up to him.
Right.
If he's God. Now, this is going to be unfair.
You don't find that horrifying in the extreme?
What's that?
You don't find that horrifying in the extreme, what you just said?
That God can kill people anytime he wants. He can move them from this life to the next life?
Yeah.
No, I don't find that horrifying because if he is God, and again, assuming God exists, he is the standard of rightness. He knows the end from the beginning. He doesn't have to guarantee me or anybody else one more second.
Then why would you want to believe in something like that?
Because I think there's evidence it's true.
But why would you want to
Because if he is good, which is what the evidence shows, he is the standard of goodness, when he takes me out, that's the right time.
Yeah.
But I understand why these issues are problematic. But remember, what you're doing is you're bringing a moral standard to the text, and you're saying that your moral standard is somehow higher than the moral standard of God. But if there is no God, there are no objective moral standards. Everything's just a matter of opinion.
Not true.
Well, I mean,
That's not true, sir.
killing
It's
a
not
baby
just a matter of
is-
opinion. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you said that numerous times.
Okay, well, I'm happy to talk to you at the microphone, but
If
But-
God can kill babies with impunity, I could never follow someone
all right,
like that.
Kayla, let me ask you a question. I don't mean to be unfair, but I want to ask you a question. Are you pro-life or pro-choice?
Well, I'm pro-choice.
Okay, here's my question, and I don't take this the wrong way. But why is it that when God plays God and chooses who lives and dies, he's immoral. But when we play God and chooses who lives and dies, that's immoral, right?
There are different, this part of the problem that I have as well is that there's not just one kind of abortion. People think abortion is killing. I mean, they think that what people think abortion is, and what I used to think it is, before I educated myself, is that they go into a woman when she's 6 or 7 months pregnant and kill the child.
Sometimes that does happen.
Well, that happens in places that are not okay, and it's not a thing that's supposed to happen.
So you would be against what we call partial birth abortion?
Something like that, yes, because they're viable outside. But the thing is when it's the first 3 months, most abortions have to happen because there's something wrong with either the child or the mother that could make it extremely dangerous.
Okay, if we were to allow abortions for those circumstances, but outlaw them for every other circumstance, would you be with me?
Well, I don't know. It would have to depend on the circumstance. That's the thing, is there's a gray area. It can't always be black and white. There's a gray area. And sometimes abortions are okay. And sometimes...
When are they okay? If there's not going to be any if the mother's not going to die, why would killing the baby be beneficial?
If it was a product of rape, it would be beneficial.
Well, yeah, we could go down that road. Let's leave rape out of it for a second because we could go, okay. But let's just say a healthy baby, no problems, the woman just doesn't want it. Should she be able to abort it?
Well, no, but that's like less than 1%.
Kayla, it's about 93% of the abortions out there are convenience abortions. They're not rape, incest, health of the mother, life of the mother. They're convenience abortions.
93% of abortions are at that term?
Yes. No, 93% of abortions are not due to health of the mother, life of the mother, rape or incest. Or birth
Oh,
defects.
that's different, okay.
Yeah, they're just because the lady doesn't want the baby. That's the reason. But I appreciate you coming and interacting. If I give you a book, would you read it? Yeah. Okay. Can you hang out after this? Because I don't have any books here. They're out. Chris is going to go get one. I just want to give you a book because you're a trooper for standing here and talking about this.